Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. Got a special one for you today. Those of you in the free flight world no doubt have heard about Nathan Longhurst. He completed, was only the second person to ever do so, the 100 Peaks Challenge down in New Zealand. And the only other person to have done it was a mentor of his and followed along very closely the whole time. It took that gentleman, I believe, Nathan told me 20 or 25 years to complete it. Nathan did it in 103 days. These are not necessarily the hardest or most iconic peaks in New Zealand, although many of them are very hard. Some of them are easy, some of them are hard, some of them are remote, but they're just 100 very cool peaks on the North and South Island, mostly South Island of New Zealand. And Nathan got into flying. He's an alpine climber and climber and hails out of the area of Spokane in eastern Washington. He's only 25 years old and went from climbing and got interested in flying just only a couple years ago, and then decided that what a cool way to connect these. So not by top landing and flying necessarily from peak to peak, but by using any means possible to get to all these peaks. He could drive to the trailheads, but not use, of course, helicopters, which they do a lot in New Zealand. So no helicopters allowed, but style was pretty loose, and that he could get to from one trailhead to another. But then once on the trailhead, ice climb, kayak, paraglide, you name it, to try to get into this stuff. In New Zealand, the bush is obviously can be really thick. His longest time out in one go was somewhere around 20 days. He gives all the numbers in the show, and we recorded this about a month and a half ago, so I apologize for taking this long to get it out, but I've had a bunch of shows in the can. Nathan is incredibly humble. He did all of this without any corporate sponsors or big flashy stuff. He just thought it'd be a cool project and went and banged it out. Did a ton of research on the front end. And of course, these kind of things had some scary moments, but kept it between the lines and got her done in an incredible 103 days. So this is his story. The story could go on for much longer than we did, but we nailed down some of the really wild things. And he did much of it with a mini wing, and then had a mishap with that one and changed it out, borrowed another glider, a dudek, and completed it out. So for those of you hungry for adventure and itching to do something pretty wild, this is a testament to how you do it. You just go do it. And Nathan is, like I said, he's incredibly humble, very articulate. I really enjoyed him. He kind of feels like an old soul. And can't wait to see what this guy does next. Enjoy. Nathan, the wider world, I think, has heard a little bit about your amazing expedition that you just completed. XC Mag just put it up. And by the time this goes up, I'm sure many more people will know about it. But I think the place to start is who are you? and what did you give us the real glass over? What did you just do? And then we'll take a deeper dive. But hi.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm a longtime fan, excited to chat. So my background, I'm from Washington State, Spokane, Washington. I grew up spending a lot of time in the outdoors with my family, which I'm super grateful for. Did a lot of, backpacking, skiing, hiking. I have a lot of siblings and very active parents, and so have that as my background. And I kind of started rock climbing some more and doing more technical things in the mountains as I got older into high school. Started, getting a little more independence.
And that was all in the Cascades or all over the place?
Yeah, mostly in the North Cascades, some stuff in North Idaho and Western Montana as well. So did like some scrambling in the Cabinet Mountains and the Sawtooths. Mostly focused in the North Cascades, like the Leavenworth area, enchantments, things like that. So I kind of started to cut my teeth in the alpine rock world, both solo and with some friends from Spokane, going and doing big routes out there. And then,
how old are you, Nathan?
I'm 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was were alpine stuff. Was that post school, or were you doing it all the way through school and stuff too?
I was starting to do stuff like in my summers, probably starting when I was 16. Um,
Okay.
yeah, when I could first go drive, going and doing trips out those first couple summers, and then yeah, the summer after I graduated high school, so when I was 18, that's when I sort of really dove into it. Basically living in my car that summer, traveling around the Cascades, doing a bunch of alpine stuff, and that summer was mostly solo. So that was when I sort of really got into like the big alpine solos and scrambles and more mountaineering stuff. Did some of the volcanoes for the first time that summer.
What was drawing you then and now to solo? Why do it alone?
Good question. Yeah, so for me, like obviously I love being in the mountains with other people that I care about, and I certainly do a good bit of that as well. But when I'm solo, I find myself to be much more mentally engaged and connected with the terrain itself rather than sort of like the more social part of the experience and what's going on with my partner
Mm,
and the interactions between my partner and myself. And
mm,
again, I love those interactions as well, but if I'm doing something that's like really sort of at the like really challenging for me and kind of at the limit of my abilities, I find that I'm the most connected and the most present when I'm solo and just focusing only on the terrain and my movement through it.
mm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool. All right. So you're moving along through the mountains. You're playing in the mountains. When did flying come into the equation?
So actually, quite recently, I started flying in Utah. I took classes at the point of the mountain in summer of 2023, so just a couple of years ago.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, and just was immediately hooked. Flew there a bunch. Um, and yeah, started doing more sort of hike and fly stuff in the Wasatch Mountains, which transitioned to some like speed flying, mini wing flying, and yeah, just sort of right from the beginning knew that that was the style I was the most interested in because I love climbing mountains. I love using my own power and my fitness to climb mountains, especially technical routes, and this idea of climbing technical routes and then using a lightweight wing to fly off has always intrigued me since many years before I started flying myself. And so yeah, that was kind
Tell
of
me
the.
more about the climbing. Are like out in the enchantments? Are you
Mhm.
aid climbing? Are you free climbing? Give us a little bit of what's your jam?
Yeah, so most I mean I've done some aid climbing in Yosemite, but other than that I haven't really done it anywhere else. So yeah, definitely free climbing. I was actually it might be kind of backwards, but earlier in my climbing career I was actually more focused on like harder free routes with a partner.
Okay.
So doing maybe some like the harder climbs on Prusik Peak and the Kolchak Balanced Rock and some like the big steep faces. And then as I progressed, I actually started to gravitate more towards going and soloing the more moderate alpine ridges and trying to link up multiple of those in a day and things like that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So more kind of endurance-y type stuff,
Yeah.
exposure type stuff, rather
Hmm.
than hard technical
Hmm.
sport climbing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Gotcha.
definitely some of both. And my
Okay.
initial climbing background was in sport climbing. So all through high school, I was a gym rat and yeah, loved just pulling hard on sport climbs.
Right. Okay. And was the initial catalyst to get into flying just to get into flying, or did you see it as I need that I need this for my toolkit. I need this for access. I need this for descents.
It was definitely a combination of both. I mean, the climbing community and flying community are certainly somewhat intertwined, and so I had connections and had friends, and I would watch, their videos and hear their stories, whether it be a big
Mm,
XC flight or some spectacular speed flying footage, and yeah, the flying on its own, absolutely had captured my imagination, but. So yeah, it was a combination of that, but also being intrigued at the possibilities of what I could do with it, combining it with my climbing and peak link ups.
mm. I mean, imagine too where you were doing it. You're seeing people fly all the time. I mean, you're up in Leavenworth and Kashmir and
Hmm.
Chelan, and you were certainly in a part of the world that was conducive to flying.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's funny because like I'd seen people flying around Chelan, but until I got closer to starting my own flying career and got more into it, I had no idea how much of a world class site it was. I didn't know that people were out flying these huge, hundreds of kilometer flights from there.
Right.
And then I was like, oh,
Oh,
like
cool.
that's my hometown. I need to go get into this.
Oh,
Um,
neat. So you go down to the point where many of us learn. I'm an original. That's where I learned as well, much longer ago than you did. But so you're getting into mini wing, speed flying. Then what?
So then I started to travel a little bit with it, start flying other places. Spent a good chunk of time flying in the Eastern Sierra. That's a place that I'd spent a fair amount of time climbing and scrambling and skiing and such in the years before I started flying. And so it was super fun to then go out there with the wing and go speed fly all these lines that I'd done on skis previously. And yeah, that was a good introduction to, launching off of higher peaks, doing some more technical launches, managing like proper big mountain conditions, learning about flying the speed wing early before it got thermic and before the air got all mixy. And then I would go out and fly XCs in some of the afternoons as well early in the season, and sort of, dipped my toes in the XC world there a little bit, flying in the Owens Valley, flying the east side and then the whites as well. And yeah, so I had a really good time.
That's a ramp up in education. I mean, considering you're just getting into flying, going to the Owens, it doesn't get much rougher or wilder than the Owens.
It was definitly rowdy. Yeah,
in the world.
Yeah, I was fortunate to have some mentors and people who would tell me how to get the more moderate conditions and to not go out when I was just going to kill myself. But yeah, it's a really good flight. My best flight was probably doing an out and back from Flynn's up to Boundary Peak and back on the White Mountains, which is pretty sweet, from Bishop north a good chunk of distance, then back into town.
Yeah, excellent. Yep. Okay, so how did this 100 Peaks? I mean, there hasn't been a lot of time since you learned how to fly. So when did this pop into your mind? How did it pop in your mind? And what is it? Define what it is, because a lot of listeners are probably unclear what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure. So I came to New Zealand for the first time about a year ago, last March, which is the end of the summer season down here in the Southern Hemisphere. And yeah, I came down for about 3 weeks, had a fantastic trip, had pretty marginal conditions. It was quite windy for most of the trip, but I did get some good flying days and was able to fly off a couple of the high alpine peaks. Sort of did this fun little outing that I made a short film about, establishing a new round trip speed record on Mount Aspiring, which is one of the prominent 3,000 meter peaks down here, by running up it and flying off. And yeah, during that trip was just like absolutely enthralled with the natural beauty of the mountains down here, the diversity, they have really incredible steep vertical relief. The mountains aren't particularly tall, but the valleys are all very deep. Most of the valleys are close to sea level. And yeah, so there's all these huge steep terrain. So yeah, I knew that I wanted to come back. To give a little bit more context, I had done a couple of these peak list, like in a season projects before. I did one in Washington and one in California. And so yeah, there's kind of all these pieces coming together of like, I knew that I liked doing this peak list in a season thing. I knew that I loved flying. Then I came to New Zealand and it was like my favorite place I'd ever been. And so I sort of spent back in the Northern Hemisphere summer, sort of was scheming and thinking about how I could combine all these things and do a big peak list in New Zealand. And yeah, did some research and found this article online about this gentleman named Don French. He's a local Kiwi climber. And it was an article about him completing this 100 Peaks challenge and saying that it took like his whole climbing career. He spent 35 years climbing all these peaks. And so, of course, I was quite intrigued and I did some more digging and learned about this list. It was created by the New Zealand Alpine Club in 1991 to commemorate their centennial year. So 100 Peaks for 100 years of the Alpine Club. And it was basically put together as just kind of like a little game, little challenge for all the members to like see how many they could climb that summer. And they're sort of hand selected.
And is this the 100 tallest peaks on the South Island or in the whole country?
So it's actually not based on any numbers. It's not based on height or prominence. It's just kind of a hand-picked selection of peaks intended to be sort of a diverse set to showcase just kind of the diversity of the mountains here. So it has the shorter North Island volcanoes. It has it does include a lot of the highest peaks. So Mount Cook and Mount Tasman and Mount Aspiring, the most of the 3,000 meter peaks are on the list. But there's also a lot of lower peaks that wouldn't make any kind of a height list, but have their own sort of interesting aesthetics, interesting climbing, cultural significance, things like that. Which I really appreciate because for me, like applying the hard numbers to the mountains, like feels quite limiting, versus going out and hand selecting the peaks that are aesthetic from a human perspective, results in a much more interesting list.
Yeah, love it. Oh, very cool. That's so that list began. What was his name and when was that?
So Don French completed the list in 2020, I believe it was.
Oh, recently.
Yep.
Oh,
yep.
wow.
Yep.
Okay.
But the list was created in 1991. Yeah. So he's been a good while on it. I've been fortunate to meet and become friends with Don. He's an absolutely wonderful guy, and we've shared a lot of good stories.
Cool.
But yeah, so that's how I found out about the list. I was intrigued. I plotted all the points out on a map, looked at it, and my first impression was like, oh yeah, this will totally work. And then I looked at it some more, and then I thought, oh no, this is completely impossible. There's no way. And then just sort of spent several months untangling this web of peaks.
And when you say, oh, no way, was the first thought to do it like Don did, you're going to climb them all? Or was having the wing aspect always a part of the plan?
Yeah, it was always a part. I knew since I'd done some flying in that first trip in March that I wanted to figure out some sort of link up project where I could incorporate climbing and flying and, enchaining multiple peaks using the wing to fly in between them. The thing that I didn't sort of anticipate, because the weather in New Zealand is sort of infamously
terrible,
volatile and fickle. It can be super windy. You get these really heinous storms that come through. It's kind of just out by itself in the middle of the South Pacific. So it can be quite bad. But I got fortunate that this summer was actually quite good for a number of reasons. Just the way that the pressure differentials on either side of the island worked out, and sort of the angle of the jet stream blowing more parallel to the crest of the mountains rather than perpendicular as it typically does, resulted in generally lower winds and longer high pressure windows than average. So I was anticipating being able to fly. I was expecting that I was going to be able to just like pick like a select few like most crucial link ups that I'd be doing like, maybe one or two of a month. And then otherwise it was just going to be a lot of traditional climbing on foot. But just sort of the way that things worked out with the conditions, I ended up being able to fly a lot more than that, which was awesome.
And what, Will Gadd taught me that style is really important. What were your rules, if any? Did you have any rules?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, no helicopter transport. That's kind of becoming a standard for climbing in New Zealand, where people are using helicopters to approach a high alpine hut or a high base camp. There's obviously pros and cons of either style, but for me personally, like, the experience starts at the bottom of the mountain, and a long, heinous approach is a part of the challenge and the appeal of climbing these mountains, and that's just part of the game. And so yeah, I did use a helicopter to drop off 3 food caches, but I never personally flew in one. And then
so you did that before you started, kind of thing, or was this okay? This zone here is going to need some food caches.
Yeah, and it actually the caches went in. I had a friend who sent them in. A couple were with a friend, and then a couple were the third was with some climbers who were going in anyways.
Cool.
But I didn't drop them off myself, so I never rode in a helicopter.
Okay.
And then, I also used a 2-wheel drive van. That was more just a matter of like practicality and saving money. But a lot of people use like big overlanding rigs to drive up some of these long river valleys. And I ended up doing some very long walks and bike rides instead. So it was all kind of human power from the 2-wheel drive car park. And didn't use any power boats either. So there are a couple spots where I could have used like a power boat to approach, but used a sea kayak instead.
You mean like down in the Sounds, like in Doubtful and Milford and some of that?
Yeah, exactly. So I paddled on Milford Sound and I paddled on Lake Te Anau, which has some long fjords on it.
Holy cow, man! I mean, that's some super treed zone.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we'll get to that. I know that area, not like you do, but I know that area.
Oh, awesome.
I remember the what do they call them down there? The not no-see-ums.
The sandflies. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Oh, they can be pretty horrific.
Miserable.
Yeah.
I'll take Alaska mosquitoes 100 times over those little guys.
Really?
Oh my God, they're vicious.
So
vicious for weeks afterwards.
The interesting thing about sandflies is that different people's reaction to them it can vary pretty massively. So for me, I react to mosquitoes way worse than the sandflies. So the sandflies were
really
certainly annoying, but Alaska mosquitoes definitely worse for me.
Oh my God, man, my ankles just look like I needed to go to the hospital.
My
Those
girlfriend is the
things.
same way. Yeah, it looked like she had some like crazy leprosy or something after the
Oh
sandflies
my God.
got to her.
Okay, so how many people have done it other than Don?
One, me.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Mhm.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It took him most of his life. How long did it take you?
103 days.
You did 100 peaks in 103 days.
Mhm.
Was that a goal or or did it just go?
So the in a season was definitely the goal.
Oh,
So,
really?
so yeah, yeah. So that's how I'd approached those previous
Seems
two peak
ambitious.
lists. Yeah, yeah. So it's a totally different style than making it like a life bucket list. It's kind of
Yeah,
taking like
sure.
a through hiker mentality and applying it to these peak lists. Just being like, okay, I'm going to go out every day, day after day after day, till I'm done with it. Um, I did kind of deliberately avoid having a specific time goal. A lot of people asked me if I was going to try to do it in under 100 days, and I was very sort of deliberately trying to avoid slipping into that mentality, just because of the nature of these technical routes and doing the climb and fly. And
You just didn't want to put that kind of pressure, I would
exactly, I
imagine,
wanted
right? You
to I
start doing
wanted
that, you start
to
making mistakes, don't you?
yeah, I wanted to avoid putting any external pressures on myself to like fly if the conditions weren't right for it.
Okay.
So yeah, I was really trying to manage that risk.
What was the most peaks you got in a 24-hour period?
I think, let's see. There was a day that I did 4 peaks, which were on the list, and there's also a 5th peak that I climbed that day that wasn't on the list. I climbed it essentially to be able to launch higher and get a better
Hmm.
glide to a spot on a glacier I was trying to get to. So 4 list peaks, 5 total.
And what was your kit? What was on your back mostly? Did it change constantly depending on did you have really good information on all these places and you kind of knew, okay, this was going to require some gear and this was a hike and this was a
Mhm.
fly potentially, or how do you handle all that?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a mixed bag with the sort of the route information that I got. Some of these peaks are relatively popular and get climbed often. I was able to find good information on those routes, but many of them are quite obscure. Some of them have seen less than 10 total ascents, and yeah, really just don't have.
Really?
Yep, yep. Some of them are
Whoa.
pretty remote and seldom climbed. So yeah, it's definitely the whole spectrum of route information. Um, my kit varied equally as much, just because of the diversity of the terrain. But for example, in that sort of that highest high alpine section, the Mount Cook region, I was carrying, my wing. Nova Bantam was my standard. I used a couple different wings, but that one was my preferred, with of course lightweight harness. And then I had, mountaineering boots, steel crampons for the steep ice climbing, 2 tools, 2 Petzl goalie ice tools. I carried a rappel line, a 60-meter rappel line for that section. A couple of ice screws, V-thread tool, food for the day, fats and sugars, lightweight mountaineering harness, and yeah, just the other odds and ends, electronics, rescue beacon, tracking, camera, phone, things like that.
Your harness, was it just webbing harness? Are you carrying a reserve and any kind of that, or just like a thin red line or something?
It was just it was the Ozone F-Lite, and yeah, I wasn't flying with a
Oh,
reserve, and yeah, so it's basically just the absolute minimal flying kit. It was like less than 2 kilogram flying kit.
okay. And the Nova Banta, I'm not familiar with that wing. Is that a lightweight? What is that? A single surface or is that an XC wing?
No, it's a mini wing.
Okay,
So it gets a class D rating, but it's like a 12-meter wing, so it's like hard to translate that.
okay. So you're
Yeah,
just descending. You're not going anywhere with that wing. You're just getting
it,
down to
it,
try to get to the next
exactly,
descent.
exactly. But I
Okay.
ended up flying 2 wings, so I flew that. Definitely preferred that. It's a much more dynamic, fun wing to fly. So if I was doing any kind of terrain flying or speed flying style, I would prefer to have that wing. It's also better for launching in high winds. But I also flew a 16-meter dudek run and fly single skin a fair bit as well,
Okay.
just because that one's it's
Okay.
lighter, it's a smaller pack volume, and that one I actually did fly some like fairly short XCs. I was never launching low and landing high, but I had a couple times where I'd launch off a summit into like mid-afternoon conditions and be able to boat my way along to get, further out towards my exit. So I think my longest flight on the single skin was 25 kilometers.
What was the longest period of time between resupplies or like car to car kind of thing? Were you often out days at a time just bagging peaks, or was it mostly each day kind of attacks?
Yeah, so I had my one longest one was 11 days. That was in the Mount Cook region, which I had sent in those resupplies for. I also did a couple trips that were about a week, and those I was carrying all of my own stuff on my back for. So I had some heavy packs to start out for those with a week's worth of food. Other than those three, it was mostly 1 to 3 day outings, fairly short.
Okay, and you said you didn't want to put external pressure on yourself, but when you're getting to kind of 80 and you're looking at I'm about 80 days in, was there some? I mean, was there any time you're just racing? You just go, okay, I gotta ting these off. I'm gonna try to do this in 100 days.
Honestly, no. Like it was definitely like I was aware of it, but I had like put so much like deliberate decision making into avoiding any external time pressure that it just didn't really bother me. Especially because like as I was getting close to that 100-day window, I knew, because I still had this one quite technical link up left, which ended up being what I finished with on the last day. And I knew that I needed perfect weather for that. It was going to be flying off one of the highest peaks, a 3,000 meter peak, and then doing a top landing like high on the shoulder of the next peak over. And I knew I didn't want to do that in anything less than perfect conditions. And so I kind of just surrendered to like, okay, like I'm going to do this day when the weather's perfect for it and not any sooner. So like, it's not really up to me at that point. It's just waiting for the perfect day for it.
You just finished a little over a week ago. You're young, 25. You've been playing in the mountains for quite a while. I've never done something exactly like this at all, but I've done some long trips in the mountains. When it's fresh like this, I'm wondering what surprising thing has happened in the last week. What is kind of come home to roost in your mind about what you've just done that maybe you weren't prepared for?
I don't know about not being prepared for this, but maybe wasn't expecting it. After all of my other previous big trips and projects and things like that, I finished and kind of immediately had like sort of this feeling of like, something missing and like a little bit of anxiety and emptiness, like the post-trip depression, a lot of people call it, where, I had like done this big thing and I'd been planning it and so focused on it for months and months and months. And then it sort of left this hole of like, oh, like what am I supposed to do now? Like, what's the next thing on the list?
That's exactly what I was getting at. Yep. I hate the getting it done.
But shockingly, and this genuinely was surprising and a pleasant surprise. Upon finishing this, there hasn't been any of that. And I think it was because it was just like such a significant emotional and mental load that it just feels good to just like relax and just like turn my brain off a little bit and just I've basically just been living an easy vacation life here in Wanaka for the last couple of weeks after finishing. I've still been flying, but I've just been flying at the sort of the standard paragliding site. It's a nice drive up launch. I've been doing some short hikes above it, but nothing technical at all. Just having fun, flying my Speedwing, and going and eating good food with my girlfriend. And it's definitely it's a new feeling for me as someone who's like always sort of waking up and be like, okay, like what's next? Like what's the big adventure for the day? It actually feels quite good to feel like I've almost like earned some space to just relax for a little bit. And I'm sure that that's going to come back soon, and the itchy feet and the antsiness is going to be here soon. But I've been pleasantly surprised by how much I've been willing to just sort of settle down and relax for a little bit.
Tell me about your girlfriend. How was this on her? There's always risk involved in the mountains, especially big ones, and especially when you add a wing to it. What was this like for her? Have you had a chance to ask her?
Yeah, we definitely had some discussions about it, and lots of long discussions about it when I was in the planning phase before I left. And because it definitely is a decision that we had to make together, because obviously we care about each other a lot, and she wants to see me excel and do things that challenge me and things that I'm excited about, but at the same time, of course, she wants me to be safe. And so we had a lot of discussion about how I was gonna how my decision making process was going to work, how I was going to really do my best to manage the risks. But yeah, it was definitely hard for her. I know that she spent a lot of late nights up watching the tracker, and because I had a live tracker on a website throughout the project, and there were plenty of times that I'd be going and maybe get to a crux section and not move for a couple hours trying to figure out some technical bit of climbing, and I'm sure that was really stressful for her. But yeah, she ended up coming down and sort of being a support crew for the last few weeks of the project, which was fantastic. Being able to have someone to drive the van around and, buy me food and feed me and just keep me moving, keep me motivated. So yeah, she's been a huge emotional help for sure. But yeah, I'm sure that both she and my parents are pretty relieved to see me done with it.
Did you keep pretty good stats? I mean, do you have any that you could rattle off? Vertical ascent, miles on foot, or kilometers would be more accurate, I guess. And like how many peaks did you fly off? Let's hear some of those.
Yeah, so I actually just put together a slideshow, which I gave for the first time last night here in Wanaka. And so yeah, let's see if I can remember. It was 160,000 kilometers, about 500,000 vertical meters of ascent. And I did 80 flights, and I think 64 of those flights were off of the summits of mountains. So out of 100, I flew off well over half of them. Yep. And then I did 5 top landings, either on top of or quite near to a summit of a peak. And yeah.
Give me the distance again. What'd you say? 160,000 kilometers?
No, 1,600. 1,600 kilometers.
I was going to say, wait, what?
And that was just the human powered distance. That doesn't include the flying distance. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you, between, to get to another zone, you could use your car, you could use your van.
Correct. Yep. So I was driving from trailhead to trailhead, and then on any given day, I would show up at the trailhead, go climb the peak, maybe like fly down to the shoulder of the next peak, climb that one, then fly back to the car. That was sort of the standard day.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Hardest moment, and that could be mental or physical. Was there a time in it where you're doubting yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a lot. It was probably the most emotionally challenging 3 months of my life. But a significant one that comes to mind was I actually in the zone that we were talking about kayaking in the Fjordlands. I had paddled up Lake Teano to approach this peak called Mount Irene. It's one of the most remote peaks in New Zealand. It's just really difficult to get to by any route. So I paddled I think it was close to a 20-mile paddle up the South Fjord of Lake Teano, and then spent, basically a full day bush bashing up to a high camp, and then did this long alpine traverse to get out there, climbed the peak, and then was actually on my way back, kind of reversing this alpine traverse. And it was kind of a funny, almost like a silly use of the wing, but basically there's a section on this alpine traverse that I had to drop below bushline for a second, do some bush bashing, and then come back up into the sort of subalpine grassiness. And just because of the shape of the terrain, I realized that I could make this literally 30-second long flight to sort of cut across this gully to bypass this bushwhacking section. And conditions were fine. The wind was fairly light. It was like an easy grassy launch to like a grassy, slope landing. And I was like, oh yeah, this is no problem. So I launched, made the flight, landed. It felt like I was coming in for a fine landing. But some of the grass here, they call it tussock. It's like these really lumpy sort of tufts of grass.
Yeah.
And so I landed in it and just came down with my feet a little weird and sprained one of my ankles quite badly. It was like the full loud pop. It swelled up. It got huge. And so I basically had to do this exit, finishing, doing all this butt scooting over talus and stuff. And then this whole big bushwhack and this long kayak out. So I ended up traveling for 2 days, getting back out from this really remote place on this very painful, very swollen ankle. And that was definitely quite emotionally taxing. And at that point, for the first couple of days there, it felt bad enough that I was wondering whether the whole project was in jeopardy and whether I was just going to have to call it quits.
How fast you come back from sprains can take weeks. Was it pretty quick recovery?
Yeah, so I spent a few days just sitting on the couch, not moving, which honestly, aside from the sprain, like my body totally appreciated. Like the first day out, I literally just slept the entire day. I would like wake up for like 20 minutes at a time to just like eat a bunch of food and chocolate and stuff and then go back to sleep. So yeah, I got some good recovery there. And yeah, did my best to, do all the PT things, and was back on it a few days later and spent the next week kind of just like hobbling, just like doing this peg leg thing. Like I could weight it straight down. I just couldn't really articulate it. So I was doing this like peg leg hobbling. I'd be like up scrambling on a ridge, and like instead of using my toe to stand on edges, I'd be using my heel to stand on edges.
Oh man, which is hard on the other side of your body. Then you start
exactly.
There's lots the other foot and the other ankle and the other hip and the other,
absolutely. Yeah, my hips got super sore from the imbalance, but it all kind of ironed itself out, and by maybe 2 weeks later felt fairly normal again.
How much as a percentage of the trip would you say you were starving? Not like you're gonna die starving, but how much would you say, how often did you think about food?
Oh, pretty constantly. Maybe 85%. Anytime other than having just eaten a good meal. Yeah. And that's honestly that's one of the logistical cruxes of doing these long continuous physical efforts, is just keeping enough calories in your body. So yeah, I was eating constantly. Fortunately, there's this absolutely wonderful snack they have down here. They have these meat pies, and they sell them just like at all the grocery stores and gas stations. They're totally delicious. They have these like mince and cheese meat pies, and I would eat like 3 or 4 of those a day.
Right. Yeah. High calorie, high
impact.
Yeah,
just like this dense brick of buttery deliciousness.
Right. It's funny that you say buttery deliciousness. I've spent enough time in New Zealand that I got so sick of meat pies. When you say meat pies,
I'm not there yet. I'm actually kind of I'm dreading coming back to the States because I know that I won't have my meat pies.
Yeah, you need a couple more years. I've spent a lot of time down there, but that's okay. So how about the flip side of that? What was, 10 years from now, what do you think will be the highlight of this trip? What moment most sits with you in terms of, I don't know, I feel like we do these things because we're chasing moments, right? And there must be one or more. Go for it. But which one do you think will live the longest?
Yeah, once again, with a project of this magnitude, there were many. But yeah, the one that really stands out, probably my favorite sort of single day of the whole project, was in this mountain down in the Darren Mountains called Mount Totoko. It's not super tall. It's about 2,500 meters, 2,700 meters. But it's right near the ocean. It's in a really, really beautiful part of the country with all these just like super deep, sort of steep walled valleys, sort of dense rainforest. And then it's just like this incredible sort of complex mountain of really steep ridges. And it's just completely coated in glaciers and these incredible ice falls on all sides. So yeah, I went and climbed that. Had a fantastic alpine climb. The Darrens are kind of the exception in New Zealand in that they have really, really good rock. Generally, the other mountains have pretty terrible rock, but the Darrens have great rock. So did this Southeast Ridge route, which is a classic alpine rock climb. So had a super enjoyable climb, perfect weather, sunny, no wind. Had this wonderful, wonderful climb. Got on the summit, and then just had the probably the coolest flight of my life, doing a little terrain flight down the Age Glacier there, literally diving through crevasses and over these insane 200-foot tall seracs, just diving down these ice cliffs, following the terrain. And so landing at the bottom of that flight after having this incredible climb, and then like the coolest flight of my life, that was just like pure just like bliss, and it's about as good as it gets.
Ecstasy.
Yeah.
Wow, cool. Given your flying part of your career has not been very long, how many times, at a peak like that, were you really questioning, do I have this? I mean, from what I remember, maybe I guess the South Island is not totally treed everywhere, but a lot of the places like you're talking about, like Doubtful Sound and that kind of thing, glide ratio and these kind of things. Was this something you looked at in advance when you were doing all your prep? You kind of felt pretty good about it, or was there a lot of, man, I think I got this, but I'm not sure?
Yeah, no, I was pretty obsessive in my planning about, scrolling around on the satellite imagery, zoomed all the way in, picking out potential landing options, then drawing lines to each of them to check the glide ratio, and then checking the wind direction for the day and thinking about the valley flow and how that was all going to work. I probably actually spent significantly more time planning hypothetical flights than I did planning my climbing routes. And so, I have this CalTopo map that I did all my planning on. It's just covered in all these little lines that I was drawing and then checking the glide ratio and then drawing another one and doing all these things. For the most part, just because of, how steep the vertical relief is off of these peaks, the glide wasn't really a major issue. I'd be able to get down to a river valley that was grassy in the bottom and then just fly as far as I could out that. But there were certainly a good number of peaks where it was really crucial, and it was like, if I get a headwind, like, I'm gonna be landing out in the trees and it's gonna suck. So I had to plan those flights around good conditions when I knew there wasn't going to be any valley wind coming up. And then some technical landings in narrow riverbeds, landing on the one little sandbar that's forest for miles in either direction. It's the one spot that it's open enough to squeeze in between the trees and land. So there's definitely a lot of obsessive planning about exactly where I was going to fly. And but in the moment while I was up on the mountains, I for the most part was able to sort of trust that planning and trust the numbers and evaluate the conditions and
see it.
See how it would work, and then
How much planning went into this?
Oh, months. Hundreds of hours.
Hundreds of hours. Back home, you were back in Washington, just pouring over everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the planning didn't stop when the project started. As I was moving and as I was becoming more familiar with the mountains and the conditions, I was definitely continuing to update, what I thought was possible, what I realized wouldn't work, what I realized would actually work really well. And so it was definitely sort of a continuous process of updating my plans and.
You had the bad sprain. Any other injuries or close calls?
Yeah, I had a couple. The most significant of which, I probably won't go into a ton of detail here. I spoke about it on another podcast, but basically had an incident where I had repaired some lines in the fields, and then made a couple of flights on the wing, which were just straight glides, and then had to do another flight and do some rapid descending, and while doing some spirals and wing-overs to descend, had one of those repairs fail, and basically bombed out with very little control of the wing, but was fortunate to be above just a nice grassy slope, and was really fortunate to walk away from that one. But otherwise, yes, several times.
You had to rapidly descend because of weather?
No, it was actually because I was coming out of the end of this valley, and there's a airfield where helicopters come in and out, and it's open airspace, and I had it's a Manter broadcast zone, but I had my radio, so I was in touch with them, but I just didn't want to be in their business, and so I was basically above the car, just was like, okay, I'm just going to get down quick. So gotcha. Definitely a less than ideal situation, definitely some questionable decision making there, partially influenced by being so deep in the project. But definitely a learning experience.
So you had to have some hard self-talk, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was another definite low moment where I wasn't sure if I was going to continue or not. That was about halfway through. I think I was about 50 peaks in at that time.
And why? Was that just because it suddenly hit you the level of risk, or was it more self-doubt, more just, maybe I'm in over my head here?
Kind of a combination of those two, in that it just made me realize how much my decision making could be influenced by being deep in that project, because it was the kind of thing where I never would have flown that wing in that situation otherwise, if I was just out flying for fun in Utah or California or whatever. And it was specifically because I was so invested and so single-mindedly focused on getting this thing done, was the only reason that I was flying it to begin with. And so, yeah, it made me very aware of like the fact that the being in this project had clearly compromised my risk management and decision making. So I had to take several steps back and really, basically change my approach of how I was gonna think about the rest of the project. And I did sort of make a significant mental shift of from then on, was really deliberate about not focusing on the timeline or completing the project as a whole, but really just sort of looking at each day as like an individual outing with its own bubble of decisions. And I would just sort of approach, just kind of classic one day at a time thing. And I would just try to make uninfluenced decisions for each individual day.
You said there were a couple of incidents. What was another one?
Others that come to mind are just like landing out in strong afternoon valley flow. Nothing that went badly, but yeah, just like flying these relatively low performance, especially on the single skin, it's a fairly slow wing. And so landing out, in a lot of wind going backwards and then, pulling the wing down
Just
it wouldn't drag me through the grass.
Fun.
Yeah. Nothing maybe super dangerous because I was often landing out in just big grassy valleys, but definitely a little bit frightening.
Huh. What about, it sounds like with all this prep, maybe not too much of it was presented too many surprises, but I would imagine that you got into some areas that were, wow, I didn't anticipate this. What was something that you really had to get creative to pull off?
There are a couple of peaks, like technical climbing routes that come to mind. So one, for example, it's called Mount Barnecote. It's a bit of an obscurity, most commonly known for its ice climbing on its south face in the wintertime. When I was up there, the ice routes were already out of condition. The bottom half of all these routes had melted out. And so I had to figure out a different way to climb it, and basically climbed one ridge almost all the way to the summit, but then got stopped by this steep cliff right at the top. And so I had to down climb all the way back down that ridge, wrap around to an entirely different side of the mountain, and then climb a whole different face. And both of those routes were like total Chaucy horror shows. So basically did like two of the worst climbs of the whole project on the same mountain. Both up and down. So up, down, around, up, down. It just ended up taking a whole day. It's not even that large of a peak. It's up on like the high glaciers, up on the high neves, and it only sticks out like maybe 2,000 feet above the glaciers. But I spent like a whole day on it. And so that was a bit of a project, but yeah, I ended up figuring out a way up that worked. And then another one that comes to mind, also a bit of an obscurity. It's called Mount Alba. And that one, had quite limited route information. And the way that I interpreted one of the, sentence long route descriptions was that I would be able to go up this certain ridge at a fairly moderate grade. I got up there, got to the base of the ridge and looked at it, and it was like, oh, there's no way. This is like very sustained 5th class climbing on really bad rock. So I figured out a different ridge, which I ended up climbing. It had this one crux section up this really striking arête feature. It's like this 30-foot arête with not really any holds on it that I ended up doing this probably 5'9" lieback move to get up it. And then learned after the fact that was actually a first ascent, and that several parties had tried to go up that ridge and gotten to that arête and gotten stumped and turned back. So that was definitely some, making it work on the fly. And it's kind of funny. So the a local climbing guidebook author was actually at my talk last night, and he was like, "Oh yeah, like send me the photos and the route description for your first ascent." Yeah,
very cool.
Yeah.
When you think about what you've just done, is there one aspect of it that really stands out as the most difficult part? Was it being hungry? Was it the technical climbing? Was it the flying? Was it being alone? Was it being tired? Was it being scared? I don't know. What was the hardest thing about what you just did?
Definitely just the mental load of the constant decision making and the constant risk evaluation. And I found, because I have a pretty deep background now in physical endurance, and so the mental load and the mental capacity was much more of a limiting factor than the physical. And so yeah, that was certainly the hardest part, was just being out making these challenging decisions and conditions evaluations and all these things. And yeah, the fact that I was incorporating the flying was definitely a big part of that. Like the mountains were challenging regardless, and the technical climbing was challenging, but I think the biggest part of that mental weight was just constantly evaluating the flying conditions, what the air was doing, what the development of the day was doing, and thinking about how that was going to affect my launch, my flight, my landing, all these different things.
What was the scariest moment?
Probably fairly early in the project. I had a moment where I essentially was stemming in a corner and pulled a block virtually out onto myself. It was maybe like 100-pound block of rock, and touched it. I didn't even pull on it. I touched it to test it to see if I could pull on it, and that little test was enough to just slide it out of place. And basically I had to hold it up above myself, reposition in the stem, and then like press out of the way and let it slide by, and then fall back into this stem in this corner. And so yeah, definitely
well, that's too Alex Honnold for me.
Yeah, I had a moment there as I was
my spine.
Yeah, I had a moment there as I was just, stuck in this stem, holding this rock into the cliff above me, that I was like, what have I done? Like, I'm gonna die for sure. How am I gonna get out of this? Because it was a pretty exposed spot. So in terms of like, yeah, just like a few seconds of like pure fear and awareness of my own mortality, that was definitely the most intense.
I want to ask you about the solo part of it. I keep thinking back to when I did the Alaska trip with Dave, and I've said this many times on the show, so I don't want to go into it. But there was stage one of that and stage two. Stage one, we had the film crew and we had Dave. And then after Denali, he had to leave. Film crew left. Red Bull cut us off. The whole final part of that, which was a significant chunk in terms of the distance. It was more than a third, but the weather was better and it didn't take me very long. Way, way, way easier, that part, because of the decision making. Like you said, I mean, part of it was the weather was better, but also just there was a lot less stress making decisions because it was only on me. If I screwed it up, who cares? It's me. I have to live with it, but not, oh man, sorry, Dave. Not that he would ever put that kind of pressure on you working as a team, but it was just interesting. It was a science experiment for me, having the two sides of it. I'm wondering if you've thought about that at all. To me, listening to some of your stories and knowing what you've just done, I almost feel like it'd be impossible to do with somebody else. I feel like you would have just gotten decision paralysis in some of these places. Yes?
Yeah, I agree.
No?
I mean, it was such like such an intense thing, and such an just an objectively hazardous thing. Like I can't imagine being on one of these technical launches where it's like, mandatory throw and go to one step off and it's like kind of high wind. Like I can't imagine being in that situation with another person and looking over at them and being like, yeah, go for it, like you first. or vice versa. Like I don't think I would have even
I guess
considered.
The chances for something to go wrong also are exponentially worse. It's just one more potential problem.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I can't really picture a way that it would have worked as in anything other than a solo project.
Any of it disappointing in some way? And were there lulls in it? I mean, I imagine with the ankle is, but was there ever any time where, let me ask this more clearly. What I love about these kinds of projects is that you're all in. There's no anything else. You don't have to worry about anything else. You don't have to be anywhere else. There's no social media. Back in my day, we didn't have that. Now that's a big thing. But this FOMO thing that, many people struggle with, all of us struggle with at some point, is real, right? Was there any point in this where, I mean, I imagine in some ways it's kind of difficult being out there and then coming back into the real world and then going back out. You had to resupply, you saw your girlfriend, you had to drive, you had to be around, reality for a bit. I don't know. I'm not asking a very clear question, but just talk about that side of it.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to the sort of coming back out into the front country, it was quite consistent that the hardest part of my day would be leaving the car. Just like,
Yeah.
you know, initiating, going from being warm and safe in bed to, you know, putting the pack on and stepping out into the wilderness, knowing sort of how intense and potentially dangerous and potentially frightening the day could be. So yeah, that was very consistently the hardest part of the day. But yeah, otherwise, like, yeah, I love being fully immersed in a big project like this. You know, there were times that I was intimidated and times I didn't know if I would do it, but I would say the vast majority of the whole time I was, you know, glad to be doing it, glad to be sort of making this vision and this dream a reality. And yeah, I mean, it's easy to talk about all the scary moments and on all the challenging moments, but the reality is, like, so much of it, I was just in my favorite place on earth right now, just the most beautiful mountains I've ever seen, and just absolutely loving it. Yeah.
That says something, you know, growing up in the Cascades, that these are the most beautiful mountains you've ever seen. I mean, the Cascades are awful special.
They're fantastic, yeah. And I think that's part of the reason that I love the mountains here in New Zealand so much, is because they're a very similar flavor, with the steep vertical relief, that, you know, the hanging glaciers, the tumbling ice falls down to these deep green valleys. Yeah.
Do you use any pack raft? Do you use pack raft for any outs?
I didn't know, but there are definitely many times that I wish I had. I don't really have any whitewater experience, and that sort of felt like a lot to sort of take on in addition to everything else that was going on with the project. But yeah, there are lots of long walks out these river valleys when it was just like a nice, moderate, you know, wandering river that I know I could have floated. That it was like, oh, like I really wish I could just hop in that and just cruise it all the way out to the car.
That's kind of a sexy way out sometimes.
It really is. Yeah. Maybe if I start flying more XCs here, I'll add a pack raft to the XC kit and try to land at the head of a valley and float back out.
There's a good buddy of mine, this guy Ty, is up in Alaska, has been doing some really wicked big XC and exit with the pack raft. It's such a nice way to go. Yeah, that's very cool. What's next? Where do you go from here?
That's the question, isn't it? I'm definitely... Yeah, I'm still intrigued and still fascinated by this climb and fly thing. But honestly, I'm really excited to dive more into the world of XC and of big mountain flying. It's, you know, I've dabbled a little bit, but it's something that I very much still consider myself a beginner at. You know, I've never flown in any comps or anything like that. So I'm hoping to sort of go down that road a little bit and learn more about flying, you know, big routes, figure out how to fly big triangles and things like that. But then, yeah, continuing on with the climb and fly, I have ideas of, you know, multiple technical routes to link up. I'd love to go to some of the greater ranges, go to South America, go to the Himalaya, and you know, see what might be possible.
Before you started the project, what was the perceived crux zone versus maybe what was the real crux? You got into it.
Yeah, the perceived crux was definitely that 2-week Mount Cook area link up, where I was doing, you know, a lot of the most technical routes, some of the steepest, you know, ice climbing, mixed climbing, and that actually all ended up going quite smoothly. Like, it was certainly challenging and it was technical as expected, but I got quite good weather, a couple of really good weather windows for that. I also had to wait out a couple storms, but that all actually went fairly smoothly. And then, yeah, there were a couple of the shorter link ups, like the Hopkins River link up, which ended up being about 5 days, was quite challenging with, you know, more technical than expected flying, tricky launching conditions. I lost a pair of sunglasses on that link up and ended up like pretty badly sunburning my eyes, and so I had to deal with that for the last couple of days, which was quite painful and difficult.
This is this duct tape mask.
This is the duct tape mask.
Viral and everywhere. Yeah. That was wild.
Yeah.
That was a cool idea.
It worked. I mean, it was the only way that I was able to get up the last mountain. I basically was committed to like a deep valley and had to essentially climb up and over this mountain, climb up, and then fly off the other side to get out. And yeah, I had a section of glacier that I had to go up. It was the last day. My eyes were like totally cooked. And the only way I was going to get up that glacier if I figured out some kind of solution. And so yeah, I made that mask and squinted my way up it.
Oh, we'll have that in the show notes. It's hysterical.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gone everywhere. I'm sure everybody's seen it, but pretty funny. Nathan, there's a lot of people, I'm sure, and I'm one of them, listening who most definitely have, I would think, considering your background, have the flying skills to, they're hearing your story going, I like this idea. I'd like to do some of this or maybe do that. Or what kind of climbing background expertise, how hard are you as a climber? I mean, how much of this was pretty gnarly climbing where you've got to have a lot of technical experience and wrapping off stuff and not leaving stuff behind, talk about that side of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely pretty involved, complex alpine terrain. A lot of my alpine background comes from the Sierra, the Eastern Sierra now. I spent a lot of time running around up there. And yeah, the stuff, I mean, the routes in the Sierra, like they're technically challenging. So, I've done a lot of these long ridges, like the Evolution Traverse, the Palisades Traverse, things like that. And they have maybe harder, like pure rock climbing on them. But the mountains in New Zealand, the rock quality and managing mixed snow and ice conditions, maybe deteriorating ice conditions if it's a warmer day, becomes much more of a factor. They're sort of like this weird, like in the summertime, it's kind of this weird in between of like, they're not high enough to be like pure alpine ice climbs like you might find in Alaska or high in the European Alps. But they're not low enough to just be pure dry rock climbs. And so, yeah, you definitely have to manage. You're like, doing some like dry rock climbing on the bottom part, but then you start getting bits of snow and ice mixed in as well. And it's like, you're trying to stay on the rock, but then you have to switch over and you're avoiding the rock and trying to stay on the ice. So yeah, definitely having experience in that mixed terrain and moving efficiently through and managing sort of the objective hazards and stuff with it is crucial for specifically the mountains here.
Now, my time in New Zealand was really wet. And I spent a lot more on the North Island because I was sailing when I was there. I was doing a lot of sailing and I was there for the America's Cup and stuff. So, but it was incredibly wet, even in the summer. Was that much of a factor for you?
Less than I expected, certainly. And you are accurate in that the North Island is generally wetter than the South Island. The South Island also has
kind of in the rain shadow in most of the places you're climbing, I'm imagining.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. So the South Island has a very dramatic rain shadow effect, where the West Coast, it rains like 300 days a year. And then the east side of the mountains is all a little more of an arid, almost a desert. And so partially because of that, I did most of my approaching from the east side up these drier valleys. And so I was able to get a little bit better conditions because of that. I mean, I did certainly have a handful of climbs that I was just in like full on like pissing rain, nasty wet conditions. Needless to say, wasn't flying on those days. But yeah, for the most part, I got, I was able to pick and choose the days for the more complex technical peaks and was able to get good weather for most of those.
If you could rewind the clock to whatever it is, 120 days ago, you're just getting started, anything you would have done differently? And I'm looking for big stuff. I mean, obviously little things, but was there something you just totally missed?
Yeah.
Or
so there are definitely many little things that I would have done differently, just like subtle route finding differences and stuff.
Sure.
It's you can't be perfect on something this complex. But I would say maybe a significant one is there's one mountain. It's one of the 3,000 meter peaks. It's called Mount Ely de Beaumont, like yeah. So it has the main summit, the highest point, which is above 3,000 meters. It's a really beautiful aesthetic peak. It also has sort of this ridge that extends from that main summit out to the west to a lower high point. It's really just kind of a bump. And that ridge is a bit technical and kind of a classic traverse. But when I was doing my planning, basically the version of the list that I was referencing just said Mount Ely de Beaumont. And so I went and climbed it and flew off it, and it was all sweet. But then several weeks later, I was on the phone with Don French, and he was like, "Oh, by the way, like you climbed the wrong mountain. The one on the list is actually that west peak that you have to do this technical traverse out to." And so a combination because of that, and then also because I was doing like some of this top landing. I don't really consider it like an official list finish in the traditional sense. Don has been I had a good chat with him about it, and he was very gracious of like, "Oh yeah, like it was your experience. You took the list as a framework and made your own thing." But that is definitely kind of a regret and a little bit of a thorn in my side of like, oh, if only I had known, like I was up there with plenty of daylight left. I had all the right kit with me. Like I could have done the traverse.
God, that's just...
But I mean, it gives me good reason to go back up there. It's the most beautiful, one of the most beautiful areas of the mountains here. So I'll go back up on another trip and go visit that west peak for sure.
That's really cool that was he watching your live tracking the whole time? Imagine he was fascinated.
He was. And yeah, so I didn't end up meeting him in person until I was like 90 peaks in. Like it was really late in the project. He lives on the North Island, and so I went and paid him a visit as I was doing my little loop of the 5 peaks up there. And he, like, I knew that he'd been following along. I had no idea how like engaged he'd been in it. I found out there's this one night in particular. It ended up being my longest single day. It was like a 23-hour continuous push. And I found out he told me that he'd been watching that night, and I ended up going until like 3 a.m. and he said that he couldn't fall asleep. He just kept checking the tracker and just watching my dog. And that last section when I was going late into the night, like it wasn't interesting terrain. It wasn't technical. It was just
incredibly boring. You're just watching a little dot on a map.
Just walking down this river valley, but he just like couldn't go. He was just like so invested and wanted to make sure that I made it back to the hut safe. And like I got emotional when he told me that. Like I was so touched that he was so invested in my experience and sort of this shared connection that we have over this shared experience. So that was super cool. Yeah.
Oh man, what a mate. That's great.
Yeah.
Nathan, congratulations. This is really cool, man. I've been smiling so hard, my cheeks are getting tired here, but I'm really psyched on what you did. I love these kind of pushing the boundaries things, and you're young, man. I can't wait to see what you do with the future, but congratulations. Nice push. And I hope you enjoy I don't know if they're your final days there in New Zealand, or you're going to be down there for a while, but enjoy, have fun, spend some nice time with your gal.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks for the chat.
Appreciate it, man. Talk soon. If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription. And it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But You'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.